New York City, One World Trade Center, boardroom on the 85th floor. Maya Johnson, 9 years old, stained hoodie and ripped jeans, had entered by mistake while looking for her father who cleaned the offices. 4 executives in $10,000 suits were negotiating an international deal worth $500 million when they saw her and burst into laughter. The CEO, William Vanderbilt III, mockingly asked her if she even spoke English properly, let alone anything besides her ghetto slang. The girl lifted her chin and responded in perfect Oxford English, then switched to Mandarin, Arabic, Russian, German, French, Spanish, and Japanese, translating their own corporate presentation she had memorized while listening from the door. The silence that followed was deafening. William went pale when the girl added in Hebrew that her father, the janitor they ignored every day, had taught her everything because knowledge is the only wealth no one can steal from you. They didn't know this girl had an IQ of 180. They didn't know the janitor father was a former State Department diplomat, fallen from grace. And most importantly, they didn't know they had just lost the deal of the century because Maya had heard and understood everything. The day had started like any other for Maya Johnson. Wake up at 5 in the morning, in the studio apartment in the Bronx she shared with her father Marcus. Breakfast with stale bread softened in milk, then the subway ride that took them to Manhattan's financial heart. While other kids her age were still sleeping in their warm beds, Maya sat in the corner of the janitor's closet at One World Trade Center, reading old dictionaries she salvaged from office trash bins. Her father, Marcus, had started his shift at 6, armed with mop and cleaning supplies, invisible to the eyes of the Wall Street executives who began arriving at 8. To them, he was just the janitor, a silent shadow who emptied trash cans and polished floors. Nobody knew that this man, bent by exhaustion, spoke 12 languages, had 3 degrees from Georgetown, had been a U.S. diplomat in 4 countries, before a political scandal where he was used as a scapegoat destroyed his career. That Thursday in November, Maya had finished her books faster than usual. Hunger gnawed at her stomach. Lunch would only be at 2, when her father would share with her the peanut butter sandwich brought from home. She decided to look for him, knowing that at this hour he cleaned the upper floors, where executives decided corporate destinies with the same ease they ordered their lattes. The service elevator took her to the 85th floor. The hallway was deserted, but she heard voices from the large conference room. She approached silently, a skill developed through years of forced invisibility. Through the half-open door, she saw 4 people in expensive suits sitting around a mahogany table worth more than what her father earned in 5 years. William Vanderbilt III, CEO of Vanderbilt Industries, was presenting charts and projections. At his side, 3 executives nodded while they discussed in a mix of English and corporate jargon about a deal with Chinese partners that would yield $500 million. Maya listened fascinated, her extraordinary brain absorbing every detail, every number, every nuance of the negotiations. It was when they mentioned the unfavorable conditions they intended to hide from the Chinese partners that Maya recognized the dishonesty. Her father had taught her that integrity was the only thing the poor could always afford to have. Without thinking, she pushed the door and entered. The silence that followed was heavy as lead. 4 pairs of eyes turned to the girl in ragged clothes who had dared violate their sanctuary. William was the first to recover, bursting into cruel laughter that was immediately echoed by the others. Mockery rained on Maya like hail. Comments about her poverty, that she was probably stealing, about the need to call security. William, enjoying the moment of gratuitous cruelty, leaned toward her with a malicious smile and asked if she at least spoke decent English or just Bronx street talk. Maya lifted her chin, a gesture she had learned from her father when facing daily humiliation. Then she began to speak. First in English so perfect it seemed straight from Oxford, translating word for word the presentation they had just made. Then, without pause, she switched to Mandarin, repeating the same concepts with pronunciation that would make a Beijing native envious. The smiles died on the executive's lips. Maya continued, switching to classical Arabic, then Russian with a Moscow accent, business German, Parisian French, Castilian Spanish, formal Japanese. In each language, she repeated not only the presentation but also the whispered comments they thought she couldn't understand. The coup de grace came when, in perfect Hebrew, she revealed she had heard everything about their intention to defraud the Chinese partners. She added that her father, the janitor they stepped over every day without even seeing him, had taught her that knowledge was the only wealth no one could steal, and that honesty was the only luxury the poor could always afford. William Vanderbilt III, the man who had negotiated with senators and tycoons, was left speechless. In 30 years of career, he had never been checkmated by anyone, much less by a 9-year-old girl with holes in her shoes. Security was called, but not for Maya. William Vanderbilt III, with the clarity that had made him a billionaire, immediately understood that the girl had just revealed information that could destroy the deal and his company's reputation. He had her sit down, ordered his executives to be quiet, and began the most surreal interrogation of his life. Maya told her story with the calm of those who have nothing to lose. Her father, Marcus, had been one of the State Department's most brilliant diplomats, spoke 12 languages, and had been the youngest consul general in American history. Then, 5 years ago, he had been caught in a corruption scandal orchestrated by politicians who wanted to cover their own crimes. He had lost everything: career, reputation, savings spent on lawyers. Her mother, Maya's mother, had died of a broken heart 6 months later. Marcus had found work as a janitor, the only job no one contested. But he had never stopped being who he was. Every evening, instead of fairy tales, he taught Maya languages. Instead of cartoons, he had her watch international news. The girl, with an IQ that free public school tests had measured at 180, absorbed everything like a sponge. William listened in disbelief. He ordered an assistant to verify the story, and within 20 minutes had confirmation. Marcus Johnson had indeed been a rising star of American diplomacy, fallen from grace in a scandal where he figured as a scapegoat while the real culprits were still in Congress. The situation became even more surreal when William asked Maya to translate in real time a conference call with Tokyo that was about to begin. The girl did it without hesitation, not only translating but improving communication, catching cultural nuances that the professional interpreter at $1,000 an hour had missed. It was at that moment that Marcus Johnson entered the room, panicked. He had noticed Maya's absence and had searched everywhere for her. The sight of his daughter sitting at the executive's table terrified him. He expected immediate termination, a lawsuit, perhaps even intervention from child services. Instead, William Vanderbilt III stood up and did something no one expected. He approached Marcus and shook his hand. Not that condescending handshake the rich reserve for the poor, but a firm grip as equals. Then he spoke words that changed everything. He needed them. The China deal was in danger. The partners had smelled the dishonesty and were threatening to withdraw. They needed someone who spoke their language, not just linguistically, but culturally. Someone with diplomatic experience to save the situation. Someone like Marcus. The offer was simple and staggering. Marcus would become senior consultant for international relations, with a salary that in 1 month exceeded what he earned in a year as a janitor. Maya would receive the best education possible, with private tutors and access to programs for gifted children. In exchange, they had to save the deal and transform Vanderbilt Industries into a truly global company. Marcus refused. Pride, that thing the poor guard more jealously than the rich, wouldn't allow him to accept what seemed like charity. It was Maya who convinced him, whispering to him in Swahili, the 13th language they were studying together, that it wasn't charity, but justice, that they deserved a chance at redemption. 3 weeks later, Marcus Johnson entered the Shanghai headquarters of China International Commerce Corporation not as a janitor, but as special envoy of Vanderbilt Industries. At his side, Maya, now appropriately but simply dressed, who had insisted it cost no more than $100. The contrast with the American executives accompanying them, uncomfortable in their Brooks Brothers suits, was striking. The Chinese partners were already prejudiced. Rumors of the attempted fraud had arrived, and the atmosphere in the boardroom was icy. The delegation leader, Mr. Chen Wei, a veteran of international negotiations, waited with the look of someone preparing to humiliate yet another arrogant Westerner. Marcus began speaking in perfect Mandarin, not the textbook kind so many Westerners display, but with the Beijing dialectal nuances he had learned during his years as consul. But he didn't talk business. He told the story of a man fallen from grace, of a daughter learning languages from dictionaries found in the trash, of how honor could survive even in the blackest poverty. Chen Wei listened motionless, but something in his eyes had changed. When Marcus finished, the silence lasted long seconds. Then the Chinese magnate did something unexpected. He addressed Maya, asking her in Mandarin what she thought of the proposed deal. The girl responded with a maturity that stunned everyone. She analyzed the weaknesses of the original proposal, suggested modifications that would benefit both parties, and above all proposed a partnership model based on reciprocal transparency. She spoke, switching from Mandarin to Cantonese when addressing the Hong Kong assistant, showing an understanding of regional dynamics that many adult experts didn't possess. Chen Wei burst out laughing, the first sound of genuine amusement his subordinates had heard in years. He declared he would do business with Vanderbilt Industries, but on one condition. Marcus and Maya had to be the personal guarantors of the agreement. A disgraced former diplomat and a 9-year-old girl would be the guarantee for a $500 million deal. The flight back to New York was surreal. William Vanderbilt III, used to dominating every situation, found himself indebted to a janitor and his daughter. But the real shock came when Marcus, calmly, presented his conditions. He would accept the role, but Vanderbilt Industries had to establish a scholarship program for gifted children from poor families. Maya would be the first, but not the last. The program's implementation revealed a shocking reality. In the outer boroughs of New York, hidden among the children of immigrants and struggling families, there were dozens of little geniuses. Kids who spoke multiple languages learned from refugee parents, who solved complex math problems for fun, who had extraordinary talents suffocated by poverty. Maya became the symbol of the program, but always refused the spotlight. She continued living in the same neighborhood, though now in a decent apartment. Every afternoon, after lessons with the best tutors money could buy, she returned to the Bronx to teach languages to neighborhood kids for free. William watched everything with growing respect. This girl who could have humiliated him, who had every reason to hate the world that had marginalized her.
Enjoying the story? Give it a little like, and don't forget to subscribe. Now then, let's carry on.
Chose instead to build bridges. During a corporate dinner where Maya had been invited to speak, a snobbish executive commented that it was extraordinary how a child from her background could be so brilliant. Maya looked at him with that disarming calm she had inherited from her father and responded in perfect Latin, then translated, "Nobility doesn't reside in blood, but in actions. And you, sir, with your actions tonight, have proven to be much poorer than I have ever been." 6 months after the China deal, Vanderbilt Industries had become a case study at business schools. The company that had risked collapse through greed was now a model of ethical international commerce. Marcus led a department of 50 people, all polyglots from unconventional backgrounds. Maya, now 10 years old, was the youngest unofficial consultant in American business history. But success brought enemies. The old executives who had been humiliated by a child plotted revenge. They hired private investigators to dig into Marcus's past, hoping to find evidence that the diplomatic scandal was real. They spread rumors that Maya was actually an industrial spy, that her genius was a fabrication. The crisis exploded during the annual presentation to shareholders. Before 200 of Europe and America's most powerful investors, Vice President Robert Sterling presented documents that proved Marcus's guilt in the scandal from 5 years earlier. They were fake, but well constructed. The atmosphere in the room became toxic, investors murmuring about withdrawing capital. That's when Maya asked for the floor. At 10 years old, barely 4.5 feet tall, she climbed onto the stage designed for CEOs and magnates. She began to speak, not in the 9 languages everyone now knew, but in a 10th, the language of numbers. She projected onto the screen a forensic analysis of the fake documents she had prepared in the last 24 hours. She showed temporal inconsistencies, manipulated digital signatures, metadata that revealed the true origin of the files. But she didn't stop there. She revealed she had recorded every conversation of the conspirators over the last 3 months, legally, since they occurred in public spaces of the company where she had the right to be. The room listened in deathly silence while a 10-year-old girl dismantled a corporate conspiracy with the precision of a veteran prosecutor. When she finished, she projected one last document, a letter from the American ambassador who had orchestrated the original scandal, now retired and tormented by remorse, confessing everything and completely exonerating Marcus. Robert Sterling and his accomplices were arrested that same evening for defamation and document forgery. But Maya didn't celebrate the victory. She asked William for a private meeting and made a request that shocked him. She wanted Sterling and the others to be pardoned, on the condition that they dedicate a year to teaching for free in inner-city schools. William didn't understand. These men had tried to destroy everything. But Maya, with wisdom that shouldn't belong to a child, explained that hatred was a luxury the poor couldn't afford, that transforming enemies into allies was the true victory, that her father had taught her that forgiveness wasn't weakness, but the highest form of strength. Marcus, present at the conversation, wept silently. His daughter had learned the most important lessons, those not found in any dictionary. A year later, Maya was 11 years old, and now spoke 12 languages fluently. Vanderbilt Industries had become a world leader in ethical commerce, with branches in 30 countries. The scholarship program had identified and trained over 200 genius children from America's inner cities. It was at this moment of triumph that the letter arrived that changed everything once again. A Swiss lawyer contacted Marcus with incredible news. Maya's paternal grandmother, whom he believed had been dead for decades, was actually alive and had left an inheritance. The woman, Eleanor Johnson Rothschild, had been disowned by the family for marrying a diplomat beneath her station, instead of the old money heir destined for her. Eleanor had fled to Switzerland, built an empire in ethical diamond trading, and had become one of Europe's richest women under a false name. She had followed Marcus's career from afar, had suffered through his fall, had watched over Maya invisibly. Now, dying of cancer, she wanted to meet her granddaughter before the end. The trip to Geneva was emotionally devastating. The villa on the lake was a monument to golden solitude, full of riches but empty of warmth. Eleanor, 92 years of repressed aristocracy, lay in a bed that cost more than Marcus had earned in a lifetime. The meeting between the old aristocrat and the child prodigy was electric. Eleanor spoke in Old French, testing Maya. The girl responded in the same dialect, then switched to Swiss German, to Elizabethan English she had learned reading Shakespeare in the original. For hours, grandmother and granddaughter conversed in languages that spanned centuries and continents. Eleanor died 3 days later, holding Maya's hand. The inheritance left was staggering, $800 million, but with precise conditions. Maya would receive everything on her 18th birthday, but only if she completed a series of challenges, graduate in at least 3 different disciplines, live a year in a third-world country doing volunteer work, and above all, never forget where she came from. William Vanderbilt III, present at the reading of the will as a witness, was stunned when Maya, now one of the richest children in America on paper, announced she wanted to change nothing about her life. She would continue living in the Bronx, attending public school, teaching neighborhood kids. But there was one project she wanted to realize immediately: a free international school for refugee and immigrant children, where languages wouldn't be barriers, but bridges, where Syrian kids could teach Arabic to American kids, where little Ukrainians shared Russian with Senegalese peers who offered Wolof in exchange. The project met immediate political resistance. The idea of a school where immigrant languages were treated with the same respect as English scandalized conservatives. But Maya had learned the art of diplomacy from her father. She organized a public demonstration where 100 kids from the outer boroughs recited the Declaration of Independence in 20 different languages, showing that American values were universal, that American culture was stronger when it embraced the world. 5 years after that fateful intrusion into the boardroom, Maya Johnson was 16 years old and spoke 18 languages fluently. Her school, now called Babel Academy, had campuses in 10 American cities and was about to expand internationally. Marcus had become the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, his reputation completely rehabilitated. William Vanderbilt III, transformed by the experience, had converted half his empire into social enterprises. The ceremony for the Academy's 5th anniversary was held, symbolically, in the same conference room at One World Trade Center where everything had begun. Senators, ambassadors were present, but above all, hundreds of children who had found in the school a home and hope. Maya took the stage, no longer the poorly dressed girl from 7 years ago, but still simple in her $100 dress, faithful to the promise she had made to herself. She began her speech in English, then flowed through languages like a river crossing countries, carrying with it stories of children who had transformed their diversity into strength. She told of Ahmed, a Syrian refugee who now taught Arabic calligraphy and had won a scholarship to Harvard; of Oksana, Ukrainian fleeing war, who had discovered her mathematical genius and now collaborated with MIT; of Chen, son of Chinese immigrants, who had created a simultaneous translation app used by the UN. But the most powerful moment came when Maya called the true heroes of the story to the stage. Not the millionaire donors or enlightened politicians, but the janitors, the cleaning ladies, the dishwashers who sacrificed everything every day so their children could have a chance. Marcus came up first, followed by dozens of parents in work uniforms, hands ruined by fatigue, but eyes bright with pride. Robert Sterling, the former executive who had tried to destroy them, was in the audience. After the year of forced service in inner-city schools, he had discovered a vocation he didn't know he had. He now voluntarily ran mentoring programs for troubled teenagers. When Maya publicly thanked him for his contribution, the man wept openly, redeemed by what had started as punishment. Maya's speech culminated with a revelation that shocked everyone. She had decided to renounce her grandmother's inheritance, all $800 million, to create the world's largest educational foundation. But with one condition: every dollar donated had to be matched with an hour of volunteering. Wealth without personal commitment had no value. William Vanderbilt III was the first to stand and commit to $100 million and 10,000 hours of personal teaching. He was followed by others, in a competition of generosity that transformed the evening into something magical. But the most moving moment was when the Academy children took the stage and, in perfect synchronization, recited a poem in 18 different languages that intertwined like voices in a choir. The poem spoke of walls becoming bridges, of foreign words becoming familiar songs, of how true wealth wasn't counted in dollars, but in how many people you could understand, how many cultures you could embrace, how many barriers you could break down with the simple magic of communication. The last image of that evening, captured by a photographer and become iconic, showed Maya at the center, surrounded by children of every color and origin, while her father Marcus looked at her with infinite pride. In the background, through the skyscraper's glass walls, New York City gleamed in the night, a city that had learned that the future spoke all languages, and that a poor girl with holes in her shoes could teach the powerful that true wealth was what you share, not what you hoard. 10 years later, Maya would become the youngest Secretary General of the United Nations, speaking 27 languages and mediating conflicts that seemed unsolvable. But that's another story. This is the story of how a 9-year-old girl, entering a boardroom by mistake, had proven that languages aren't barriers, but keys, and that the greatest power in the world isn't money, but the ability to understand and be understood. In her office at the UN, Maya keeps framed a photo of that first day, when in a stained hoodie she had challenged men in $10,000 suits. Below, a plaque with the phrase her father repeated to her every night in a different language. Knowledge is the only wealth no one can steal from you, and kindness is the only strength that doesn't need violence. Tate. Babel Academy today has campuses in 50 countries, has trained 1 million polyglot children, and has proven that in a world that builds walls, languages are ladders that allow you to climb over them. And it all started with a girl who spoke 9 languages and had the courage to use them. Like if you believe knowledge is true wealth, comment which moment touched you most. Share with someone who needs to know that talent knows no social class. Subscribe for more stories that show how one person can change the world.